representatives, though, for the NA region going on to that land, and they are going to be facing off here to prove who the #1 team truly is from NA.
Jack, it looks like we're in the hot seat here as we enter seat of the Triumvirate, the starter dungeon on 24 for both of these teams, and we're going to see that big scary pull coming out of both teams and the bloodlust on both sides right away.
Yeah, at this point, it really is going to be going back to that kind of consistency there where you were saying Hadrian, taking very large hits. He is able to get himself topped back off very rapidly here. So at this point, it's always very important to make sure you're able to kind of keep an eye on your tanks here. You are seeing, the Agrimar's trinket, being used to great effect here, but there is just such huge damage, like we were mentioned, with that Dark Withering going out.
And here. JB does fall there, proccing 1 5-second death on the board for Method NA. Not using that battle res because they do have the release right at the entrance of the dungeon. That's their checkpoint. Zongo going down on the team Omegasniped side on the right side of the screen as well. So we're now tied at 1 apiece with this really dangerous trash pull. Resetting the boss over. Zyronic taking really low and ends up dying as well. 3 deaths on the board for Team Omegasniped. Not a great way to start the dungeon for them, but they do manage to deal with that huge trash pack. Reset the boss as well. Hadrian goes down now too, and they're at 4 deaths.
Yeah, this really isn't exactly the kind of start they want to have. 5 deaths to 2 here, adding another one going down there. It does give Hadrian the opportunity to kind of reset, of course, his purgatory there, because after proccing it on all that trash, with just huge, incredible damage going out onto him. But like you said, that's really not the start that we want to be having here going into this, because every death when you're getting into these 2 teams who have been so consistent, so powerful today, taking down their opponents, this is really not the performance they were expecting going into it.
Team Omegasniped started this properly. They did reset Zeral right away and pulled the goos on the side, but just too much dot damage coming in, leading to a few of those deaths. The reason those goos are being kited really slowly around them is they just put a really heavy dot on the tank, something you want to be avoiding, but you do want to kill them to free up the space for the boss, which we're seeing has already been pulled over on the left side for Method NA at 87% now as they're rearing up to get ready for that first burn phase. One of the players will get sent down in kind of their own phase. You'll see it on the player frames as one of them fades out with a little bit of a recycling icon, if you will. Once they kill 10 of the mobs downstairs, they'll have access to their special action button, and when they use that, they will come up, stunning the boss for about 10 to 12 seconds, proccing a 200% damage intake for the boss, and that's when you're going to see a huge damage come in.
You've seen Marvin, of course, having that recycling icon like you said, recycling very important here, as of course they are getting that quick stun out onto it. They got to make sure they get that quick pushback onto one of those mobs. Really good grip there by E-Man to make sure they're kind of all staying away. And then, of course, getting all of it grouped in together here. First immunity phase, they are just absolutely decimating the boss here, getting him down past the 50% mark here. Very important to be able to pump out as much as possible. You're seeing Omegasniped here going to be dealing with their first down phase very, very soon.
Yeah, both Warlocks benefiting a lot from some of the multi-dawning. We do see some Warlocks also tend to banish these small GUIs on the boss. Now, one main theme for the dungeon here is that any of the void that you see on the ground, such as the one that the boss has spawned from the goo trails, or of course from the Obliterate, or that we see later in the dungeon, especially in the Saprish area, any enemy that enters that will get a 100% damage increase buff while they remain within that area. So it's important, of course, not to have those in there if you're trying to actively tank anything or if there's any residual damage on the group. During this kind of fixate phase on the boss, it's not too dangerous as long as he's not running into any of the coalescing voids on the side.
Yeah, at this point, you're seeing Omegasniped getting into their first vulnerability phase. I believe Method NA was around 40%. So you're seeing fairly close area of Omegasniped being able to try to keep pace with them there and doing a very good job to be able to kind of burn him down and then start moving his way out of the room very quickly here. As Method NA is, of course, entering in that second area as E-Man is going down to be able to kill all the little oozes.
Yeah, so the tank is a viable target for that phasing. Does go down. It's a bit easier for the tank, really, actually. You can kind of pick up 10 of those oozes, no problem. DPS them down. They enter their second burn phase and destroy Zeral, finishing him off and getting ready to move out of this area. There will be a bit of RP that they need to wait on as Ilaria kind of talks to Locust Walker about what they had at dinner last night, and they will go and pull some extra trash on the side, seeing that Paralyze come up on the right screen, making sure that patrol doesn't overlap them as they're dealing with this first pull.
Yeah, it's so important to make sure that they're able to kind of make sure they're having that open space, and also, in case Method NA has any kind of deaths, that is going to be the first checkpoint that's available to them until they kill Saprish. So, of course, you want to make sure there's none of the patrols that are going to be keeping you from getting back to your team, or in some cases, just being able to patrol almost right on top of that location.
Ooh, it looked like he almost walked right through one of those goos over on Team Omegasniped, but they got it just before he did that. Gets the second stun out, and they'll be able as well to finish the boss here and kind of keep up with Method NA, but they already have that 3-death differential, 15 seconds to make up, not to mention, of course, being behind just in terms of raw progression through the dungeon. Zeral will be falling here for Omegasniped, whilst Method NA on the left side of the screen are moving over and waiting, Jack, waiting. For Ilaria to tear down the wall here.
Yeah, and at this point, they are getting into that central courtyard here. Method NA engaging with the first of the Rift Wardens here. And I've really been impressed, I got to say, with mid improving here on Windwalker. We've seen, a lot of times being able to have your practice streamed, a lot of times can be great entertainment for those watching, but it also can be drawing out a lot of times, people going down on your play and breaking it down into all these little pieces. But and a lot of times we've seen, the struggle of having to, re-roll, basically learning those nuke specs, and really has shown their commitment not only with mid sticking to Windwalker here in the 24s here, but also just the kind of commitment and the improvement that you've been able to see throughout the entire tournament here, sticking to his guns and improving, of course, along the way, really showing, the progression over, just the practice that we've seen on streams a lot of times.
So I'm liking what I'm seeing out of Method here, kind of dragging towards the next portal as they finish this first Rift Warden off. You want to be in combat with them constantly so that you don't have to incur too much of those gauntlet mobs spawning on top of you, dealing with a lot of those goos, pre-clearing the path to the next Warden. Of course, over for Team Omegasniped on the right-hand side. Ilaria finally comes in like a wrecking ball and destroys the wall, opening it up for them as they start their pathway to Saprish as well. We do have to kill 3 Wardens before Saprish, the second boss of the dungeon, will spawn. Yeah,
and always important to note, when you kill these Rift Wardens, the next one will spawn, will open up here. You have a very limited time to be able to get to it before the portal of the Rift Warden guards actually start spawning some smaller voidlings that can, of course, spawn explosives. They don't really give any percent. They actually just kind of take a little while to kill, and they are just really put up a big number of actual void zones that you have to be stepping out of as they do spawn, making sure you're kind of getting away from those to be able to take them down quickly. So there is going to be that big rush to be able to get to that Rift Warden first before any of these little voidlings spawn, and there is going to be quite a journey to be able to get to that third and final Void Lord.
And they really just kind of slow you down. Certainly something you don't want falling in your path. They do aggro the second Warden here, whilst Team Omegasniped is still working on the first one, dealing with some of those explosives that are going off and dip a few of the members quite low. A lot of dots coming out. The mage does go down. Cauterize had already procced. Ironic goes down as well. That's an extra 2 deaths on the board. And we also have Luffy going down. A lot of damage coming in on the Windwalker, and the tank is barely holding on, kiting around in circles, making sure not too many of those dots are applied. But this is looking really dire because as the tank is kiting, a ton of orbs are spawning, and those are pretty much going to finish off the rest of the pack. The Windwalker does go down, as does the tank, so they have a full wipe over on Team Omegasniped, whilst Method and A is now already starting to move over towards that third Warden.
Yeah, they really weren't that careful or cautious with, of course, the patrol going around near that Rift Warden here. And the Rift Wardens, as we've seen, have so much HP there. It really just wasted so much time to be able to have to get everybody reset. And while you'd like to be able to have your tank kind of prolong the pull, keep everything, in combat here so that it won't reset its health or anything else like that, they really are not able to here. So at that point, when they have to deal with all of the explosive orbs going out over there, they just have to have that full wipe and reset.
E-Man moving aggressively up the ramp to get the Trickster out of the shadows. It seems he was the one who played the trick on the Trickster. Did not expect that, grabs it over, pulls it. Now, the Tricksters do have kind of a predetermined pathing through the dungeon. There's about 5 or 6 of them that spawn. They know that that one's there and could intercept their path. They wanted to get it out of that stealth early, bring it over and effectively and efficiently cleave it with that Rift Warden, the third Rift Warden that they need to kill before they move on to Saprish. But they'll have a bunch of trash to deal with before that. A lot of damage coming in on the tank. We have that Purgatory proc on Method and A side as well. Safely heals back to full. A few clips on the team as well, but nothing, no deaths to speak of. Team Omegasniped has now moved back to that first Warden and is trying to down it.
Yeah, really at that point they're pulling back a lot further. They're staying away from those patrols, and while they do want to be able to start clearing out, like you said, some of the pathway going towards that second Rift Warden, they just have to be so careful here. One of the things, and this is kind of similar in that vein to Port of Stars, where there's so many different patrols going on, there's so much extra trash that you need to be able to avoid here as you're going throughout this instance, that a lot of it is going to be on your positioning as you're getting set up here and really watching and planning out your pulls as best you can.
Lots of things you want to avoid in this dungeon, especially with all of the void on the ground. There's a lot of trash in this Saprish area here that you want to clear space for because you need a lot of real estate for Saprish. Team Omegasniped, of course, always keeping an eye on them. They have moved over to the second Warden on the side. Pretty sizable pull coming in from them here. A lot of damage coming out, and we do see that Quaking Pulse as well. Something that you want to make sure you're not casting during, otherwise you will be locked out. Procs about every 20 seconds, one of the affixes of the dungeon. Big pull here for Method and A as they slowly backpedal out of these traps. Don't want to get caught in them. They do a substantial amount of damage and also stun any players caught in it.
Yeah, really good move there by E-Man, moving very close to Saprish there, but he was just making sure he was able to uncover the Trickster before they actually pulled in with the rest of the trash back here. So they are taking down the rest of these champions here. They're making sure they're able to clear out the rest of the room here. And then to the right, they will, of course, have just the additional trash packs going on here. here. I thought they were going to be pulling just a little bit bigger, but at this point, they do have quite a sizable advantage here to be able to actually take their time, let the tank die, reset Purgatory, get the res off onto him, because Team Omegasniped still has to clear out these Rift Wardens.
Yeah, certainly want that Purgatory available on the tank with some of the danger coming up in the rest of the dungeon. Omegasniped still dealing with that Warden. They've now killed the second one. We'll be moving over along the side here towards the third one. Of course, the distance between the second and third being about double as the distance between the first and the second Warden. So they might have some of those small adds drop on them, but all eyes on Method and A right now as they do pull Saprish. Now, Saprish is a split damage fight. Everyone shares a health pool here. He has two of his pets, Darkfang, the cat, and also that thing that Skyfin.
Yep.
It's really creepy, but the Skyfin as well. Both of them will jump to the most distant target away from them. The Skyfin will, of course, cast the fear, as we see here, the Dread Screech. You want to interrupt that, otherwise everyone gets AoE feared for 5 seconds. And the cat will do this frontal cleave. You definitely want to make sure you avoid that, but it's also important for the group to stay together to maximize the cleave from the melee on the targets, especially with 2 Windwalkers, Jack.
Especially with the 2 Windwalkers, and of course when you're relying on your Moonfire cleave from the rest of Druid, when you're running a Lady and the Child, and of course Fury of Nature to be able to kind of pump out that additional DPS there. It goes a very long way when you're able to have that multi-dotting potential coming out there. And like you said, when you're having the double melee composition, keeping everything tightly packed in together has been so important here. You're also going to see out of Marvin very great positioning, kind of moving ahead of where the rest of the team's going to go, stepping away a lot of times from those explosives, as you're seeing him kind of redirecting here, making sure he's able to get on the other side of the explosives. That way he's able to kind of get around, be in a great position here for the next time that the Shadewing does end up jumping to him. That's what you really want to be seeing out of the range.
Darkfang, the cat, jumping around and barely by a whisker missing some of these cleaves on the targets, but they're doing a really perfect job right now to make sure that none of the players are getting clipped and killed, and also moving in tightly together, as we mentioned earlier. Now, one of the other benefits of moving together, especially with this affix, is that you don't get too many orbs that are spawning in the middle of nowhere, and you're just kind of increasing DPS. Melee can turn to it, the tank can turn to it and help it. Don't detract too much damage from that Warlock. Team Omegasniped has spawned Saprish now, has killed their last Warden, but they'd have some trash to deal with first.
They do indeed have to deal with quite a bit of trash here. And like you said, you know, the nice way about having the Warlock is you are also able to get that extra damage increase by him just being able to drain soul all of those explosives very easily. And you're not relying on any of the melee to be killing them. We saw a lot of times, especially out of the Chinese region, where they're really relying a lot on melee to be dealing with a lot of the explosive orbs. And on a fight like this, it's so difficult to be able to kind of guarantee that and to be able to kind of deal with that when you're having all the traps going all over the place, when you have to be dealing with so much extra, damage coming out, that is mainly avoidable, right? And right here, the positioning has just been so strong, and by clearing out so much of the room, they've been able to do such a great job. Even as you're seeing E-Man dropping just a little bit low there, he's getting a very big death strike to be able to top himself off there. Very clean kill there on Saprish.
Yeah, no problem for them. Did well to avoid all of the traps. The player spread out well for the charge, which of course per player hit will get an increasing shadow damage stack that will hit the tank pretty hard later. No problem for that. Method and A does finish the fight and are starting to move over to Viceroy, but a bit of trouble in Paradise over on Team Omegasniped on the right-hand side. We did have a death over there on Zongo, unfortunately. They did not use the battle res, if I'm not mistaken. He just released at the checkpoint at the first boss and is running over as they're kind of cleaning up the rest of the trash, getting ready to pull Saprish as well. Method and A, though, already moving towards the third boss's room, Viceroy, to pull some of this trash.
Yeah, looks like there might have been just some kind of fatigue coming after Omegasniped here. They're playing, much less clean than they had been in that previous series. They just came from this instance here, so one would think they'd be a lot more comfortable going into it, being able to actually, have very smooth trash pulls. But I think a lot of it has just been maybe a little bit of fatigue from a very long day. They have, like we've talked about earlier, been playing the entire day, working their way up from that lower bracket, whereas Method NA has kind of had about an hour or hour to 2 hours of break to be able to kind of watch the games, start practicing again for the seat that they were planning on doing and having that advance notice of.
No excuse. They must play all night for our entertainment. Team Omegasniped does use their Bloodlust here on the pull for Saprish. Doing well to kind of connect together. They do have the double ranged here, so 2 people that an extra person that needs to pay attention on moving in within proximity, especially that Fire Mage wanting to spread a lot of that Ignite to the nearby mobs. So we'll keep an eye on that positioning there, but Method and A dealing with a lot of this very dangerous trash, especially in this fortified setting before Viceroy. The most dangerous of it being, of course, that patrol that we see ominously lurking in the background, patrolling in a clockwise fashion around this area with the evil Shadow Weaver of Mordor.
Even before the Shadow Weaver, they also had to take care of that Trickster, almost taking down Marvin, so really good on E-Man to be able to get that quick grip onto him. It's always so scary when you're able to have these, the stealth mobs running all over the place, and really lucky that Marvin was able to quickly survive that, getting, of course, not having any like quaking into the Trickster jumping on top of him here. So they are going to kind of sidestep, getting themselves in a good position to be able to deal with his Shadow Weaver here, and they're not going to be line of sighting when they're in just this open field. So it's always important to make sure they're getting that Dark Splice interrupted very quickly here. And of course, they will have to deal with the Dark Matter instantly getting marked here. They need to focus it down, and it really is the ultimate explosive orb.
I mean, every bit of DPS matters. That Dark Matter needs to die right away. They do have a bit of LOS as we see the blink go off on the side. They have kind of some of these fragments on the side, but there's a lot of damage lost, and they're not really pre-positioning to be in a good position to do that. They'd lose a lot of damage doing so, so they're just opting to make sure they burn them down. There's another one, Unstable Dark Matter, immediately dies before that collapse, which would deal a substantial amount of damage to the team. Doing really well with what is probably the most dangerous trash, I would say, in this instance, or at least amongst it. They take it really slow. They don't combine it with any other trash while making sure that they down it, kill those Dark Matters properly. Team Omegasniped looking solid again, finishing off Saprish, and are starting to as well head over to this trash. But Method is just building a bigger and bigger lead, not to mention the 11 death difference.
Yeah, they've really been consolidating their advantage here, doing a great job to be able to deal with the Shadow Weaver there. And the CC, the kicks, the stuns have just been on point on the side of Method NA. They've been doing a great job being able to deal with a lot of these Void Flayers here, because they are often one of the most difficult mobs, or the most painful mobs, really, if you let them free cast here. And it will be, of course, going into Viceroy, so imperative to make sure you're having that strong focus onto them here. So being able to deal with the Void Benders, of course, because you will have that vacuum. That's why you're seeing the positioning by JB and Marvin spreading out quite a bit more here to make sure that if the vacuum goes on them, they're able to kind of step their way out of there, not actually affecting any of the other players.
Looks like more Spaghettios on the Team Omegasniped side, as they do have kind of a wipe. Now, you know, you always look at these and you say, is this intentional? But there's nothing really intentional here. You can kind of just dissect this area, pull only the 5 GUIs over into Viceroy's room. But unfortunately, it looks like they got too close to one of the packs on the side, proxied by accident, and did lead to an almost full team wipe, an extra 4 deaths on the board. They're pulling those GUIs in the lower area upstairs now, likely because they have a very poor Shadow Weaver pad at the moment. Want to make sure they don't aggro that by accident. Method now finishing up the last of their trash, and they'll be pulling Viceroy here momentarily.
Yeah, and at this point, you know, it is quite scary when you're kind of running up the gut of that road there. It's a very fine line to be able to walk between pulling any of the Void Benders onto either side of the room there. So very important to make sure that you're able to just have everybody, you know, staying together, staying in that correct position, because it can be so dangerous here. As Omegasniped is, of course, dropping down, NA has, of course, finished the rest of their trash here, and they're all set to be able to pull Viceroy.
Yeah, so let's talk about Viceroy a bit. I hate him. Back to you, Jack. No,
well, I'll take care of this here. Viceroy is, of course, you know, having not too many really different phases. They will have the constant tentacles spawning here. You will have 3 at a time. And while the spawns are random, you can get some pretty advantageous or extremely unadvantageous spawns coming out. They will, of course, just like the regular Void Flayers, be casting a single target focus into one of them and into one individual, and having stacking damage until they get interrupted.
I would say it's disadvantageous, not unadvantageous, but it is
advantageous for the tentacles, let me tell you.
That is true, that is true. Those tentacles are a wild bunch whipping back and forth all the time, much like my long, luscious hair. Viceroy pulled over to the side. Now, there's 3 casts you do have to look out for. A couple of them you mentioned already. The Dark Blast is just his general cast on the tank, doesn't really melee. The only way to move him is to interrupt one of his casts, but you have to make sure you have interrupts available for the Howling Terror, which will AoE fear the group for 5 seconds, and most importantly, that Eternal Twilight. That will cast momentarily here. We should be seeing those 2 Ethereals pop on either side of the boss. E-Man will grip one of them to the other, making sure that they're stacked for some cleave. Here they come right now. It actually AoE grips it on top of the tentacles. Really smart heads-up play there by them, efficiently cleaving everything, and somebody will need to interrupt that Eternal Twilight 10-second cast before it goes off. Otherwise, that's all she wrote and lights out for this group. Interrupted at the last second. Really like to see that from the teams, Jack. Waiting until the last possible second to interrupt. The boss is not doing anything. You buy yourself a few extra seconds of no mechanics.
Yeah, and really avoiding mechanics is something Omegasniped would like to be able to have. You know, that it looks like they might have just had an extra trash patrol kind of coming into play there, or just the Shadow Weaver, just a huge damage that it can deal if you're not getting rid of the Dark Matter there. So very scary to see. They did, of course, get a pylon dropped in time, so they will be able to have the mass res coming out there very soon, right? But as we've seen so many times in the past, when you're not able to have that strong focus damage onto that single target, or you're not opting against a line of sight, it's just a very big risk coming out for the Dark Matter.
That's a yikes for me, dog. That's a lot of damage coming in on Team Omegasniped. Another 20 death difference between them on the board, another 5 deaths because of that wipe, of course. Method NA dealing well with Viceroy. Having some really beneficial tentacle spawns. We do know that these 3 tentacles can spawn anywhere in this area. We're getting the second ethereal phase now for them, and they're getting some fortunate spawns where you really take advantage of these 2 two Windwalkers, being able to cleave two tentacles down at the same time, whilst the Warlock is kind of multi-dotting everything and dealing with the one in the back, doing well to coordinate their interrupts so that they can constantly move the boss around to all of the tentacles and get the most efficient damage that they can.
Yeah, and in many ways, they really haven't had any hard times really going on for a lot of these tentacle spawns here. Unlike Team Omegasniped, going up to that 27 death mark here, just struggling to really deal with all the trash that's going out. But a lot of times we'll see if there are those disadvantageous tentacle spawns and the Void Tenders are coming out, shielding the boss, it's so important for the healer to kind of stay on their toes, watching, of course, any of the stacks going up on a targets affected by those Void Flares, because at that point, nobody will be focusing on any of the tentacles. It'll all just be on the Void Flares, and you need to be able to kind of buy yourself enough time to be able to keep them, all of your players alive, while, of course, they're dealing with the tenders, and then moving on, of course, to the flares.
Of course, these Umbral tendies coming up are not the ones I prefer compared to the chicken tendies, but nonetheless, they do need to die and go down. The boss is moved over, well interrupted on that fear one more time. Another Eternal Twilight phase coming as the two Ethereals come in, immediately gripped on top of that mob there, and they DPS them down.
Yeah, great job chewing through those tendies there, moving on to the tentacles, and just absolutely wiping out all of them. Having very good spawns as they're going through. Omegasniped here, still just working to be able to deal with the rest of the trash leading up to Viceroy here, as Method NA has played this so cleanly with only 3 deaths on the board, 6% left on Viceroy.
I mean, they're just dressing these tendies with Omegasniped hot sauce, I'm telling you right now, but they're about to finish Viceroy here in just a moment, and they will be moving over. You know, they have some trash left on the board, and this is on purpose because once Viceroy dies, which is right now, they will have a bit of RP time while Ilaria once again will come in like a wrecking ball and open up that pathway leading up. They will run over to the side and pick up some extra trash, getting just enough percentage that is only remaining and covered by the two Wardens waiting in Lura's room, the final boss of the dungeon. Yeah,
at this point, I think they're E-Man's kind of going for that Trickster off to the far side on the right of the screen on Method NA. There is this kind of roundabout path you're able to kind of go for here, where there will be a Trickster kind of guarding this other side. So a lot of teams you will see kind of go right up the gut, right up that pathway, but there actually is an entire area covered by that void that you can actually walk around to be able to go around all of this, and there is going to be a Trickster spawning there, so good to be able to get all their trash percentage while they are waiting for the gates to be able to open here, and they will be able to finish off the last 5 or 6% from those Rift Wardens that are in Lura's room.
Yeah, so there is indeed a double Rift Warden pack coming up, exactly like the Rift Wardens that we saw earlier for the Sapphish trash that we needed them to kill them in order to spawn Sapphish in the first place. This time there's 2 at once. Just want to make sure you interrupt these Stygian blasts before they cast on one of the players. It does nuke them for a substantial amount of shadow damage and fear them for 5 seconds. Also, there's some area denial on the ground as we see some of those kind of void crashes go out. Players want to make sure they avoid those. No pun intended that time. But in this room, there's also some extra small voidlings pouring in from the side of the room that players will just kind of pick up and DPS down, similar to how Lura the boss will do, as we see later in the fight. Coach Mitt does go down here, though, unfortunately.
Yeah, I believe the boss has just been pulled really quickly there. They want to make sure they're able to kind of drag the Rift Warden up onto the stage there, actually starting the boss encounter and resetting the boss here. What this will allow the team to do is actually skip that little RP event that's going to be happening there. So thankfully, the respawn point is just right outside of Lura's temple here. You are able to kind of quickly get back into it with the group, so not too much damage lost there. And at this point, they are just kind of getting their cooldowns back. They will have Lust available to them, and all 3 battle reses going into Lura.
Oftentimes expecting to see that Bloodlust popped with that first burn phase, which we'll talk about momentarily. Omegasniped has pulled Viceroy at this point down to 60%. Now they're having their Bloodlust available in 30 seconds. Not sure if it's the best for them to use it on Viceroy or leave it for Lura. Either way, it does become available very soon for them. Method and A will be rearing up here in just a moment to pull Lura, excuse me. Now, this boss has a few phases. As soon as you pull her, you have about 1 or 2 seconds to get just at least 1 GCD in before she goes immune, spawning a Greater Rift Warden on the left side of the screen here. That Greater Rift Warden has similar abilities to the first ones we saw, but also has the dreaded Armageddon, a shadow version of the Armageddon. Somebody does need to soak the big purple swirly, else the entire group will get nuked for a substantial amount of damage. In the meantime, of course, we do have those small voidlings pouring out of the portal. Once those die, they actually leave a void pool on the ground.
Yeah, really taking down the Rift Wardens is so very important to be able to actually activate the nice time. That is going to be the backlash, that vulnerability phase lasting only a couple seconds here, but having the boss being able to take that 200% additional damage. A lot of times you will see the teams use their Bloodlust there, not Heroism, Bloodlust, on that first backlash to make sure they're able to instantly carry over that duration onto the 2 Rift Wardens, which come out immediately after, of course, the backlash spawns. So at this point, killing the last of those Voidlings, and they will be able to get Bloodlust up.
Yeah, so they're going to have a 10 seconds of DPS uptime here at 2 200% increased damage taken from Lura. Everybody's just pumping out all of their personals. Windwalkers are really primed here, getting a ton of damage in as we see them kind of skyrocket up on the meter. Marvin keeping up as best as he can. Dark just shooting above everyone else, but Lura does get back into her immunity phase. She only lured the competition in for a moment for a bit of damage. This time we have 2 Greater Rift Wardens spawn. They actually opt to use their Bloodlust here at the start of the Rift Wardens rather than using it on Lura's DPS phase and then carrying it over to them.
Yeah, the weird thing about this is a lot of times, I personally always like to be able to see the Lust coming out, of course, for the backlash, because it will immediately carry over into this. A lot of times the Rift Wardens will, I mean, at least at this point, you're kind of committing to only having, I guess, one of the Armageddons that are coming out total, because you'll be able to kill them, of course, before the next ones do go out here, hopefully. But a lot of times, if they are able to kill it in the next 10 seconds before these do end up going down, although it is 24, so it might be quite a bit harder here, they want to make sure they're able to get these down quickly. So I guess they still actually have the full duration going into it. We've seen a couple times in the 23s where they're able to just completely annihilate both Rift Wardens, and they have kind of 10 seconds where they just have to deal with a little bit of Voidlings, and the backlash hasn't quite started yet. So I think this actually is a much better play, especially considering, JB's preference to be able to actually push scenarios into attrition healing whenever possible, where you're prolonging the fight, but you're dealing with less mechanics in the process, and it's just going to come down to kind of raw healing and mana conservation.
They do finish off both of those Greater Rift Wardens. Team Omegasniped now with 16% on Viceroy. Should be downing that soon, but Method getting ready to get their second round of burst in on Lura here, as she does start with her backlash phase. Huge damage coming in, after which the teams will kind of dance left and right across the stage. She has finished her burn phase here, starting at 45%. They'll move back and forth across the stage every time. She kind of picks up all that void on the side, as we're seeing here, and dumps it and tries to hit the players with it. So it's not exactly the most difficult mechanical phase, but numerically it starts to get out of hand towards the end, as she does have an increased damage aura as it ramps up. It's ironic going down now for Team Omegasniped just at the very end too.
Yeah, 29th death on the board for Omegasniped. It's always very important to be able to have any kind of battle reses left available, but they're at 4% left on a Viceroy here, so they should just be able to get it down very quickly, and he'll be able to just respawn right there at that checkpoint there. A lot of times you're seeing a JB kind of pre-spreading, making sure he's able to kind of get out of the way of everybody else, but also doing a great job being able to have efflorescence kind of overlapping between the 2 points here where everyone's going to be stacking at. So whenever the the void actually picks itself up again, everybody will be able to kind of stand right at the edge of the efflorescence to be able to stay in it, still get some good beneficial healing here, and then being able to actually reset it kind of on top of that same spot every single time. So great positioning here and great support, of course, for JB's.
Yeah, and you're seeing similar mechanics, of course, from E-Man with that Death and Decay on the ground. Want to maximize your damage uptime, putting the Death and Decay so that he has room, and Lura's hitbox also hits it as they bounce back and forth. And, only about 10-15 yards on the map right now, spreading out for this quaking, making sure that they don't interrupt each other. Lura, there's a lot of health on this boss in a 24, well over 1 billion. And even though they started at 45%, which we've seen lower from some of the other teams in this regional grand final, I mean, they're doing a really good job to chew through the rest of her health pool. Team Omegasniped just now getting into the trash room for Lura. I mean, it's just way too little, way too late right now, Jack.
Yeah, especially when you're able to see just the huge damage that Dark is able to put out here. You often see just how powerful Windwalkers are, and like what we were saying, while having 2 Windwalkers can be great, I mean, it seems to be only 1 Dark here, as Method is at 2% left onto Lura and looks very strong going into the game 1.
And I mean, looks they're going to take the game, no problem, Rich. And I mean, pretty dominant performance coming out of Method there.
A phenomenal time coming out from Method indeed, that 27 minutes and 42 seconds. And I do want to say, though, in the other camp, last time that we actually did see them in seat, just 1 short map ago on the team of Omegasniped, it was 30 minutes flat. So with the deaths that they had accrued, they pretty much had already gone over that, even where they were at in the dungeon. So I feel like there is almost a certain level of, we made it. Like, we made it to the land, headed into that first map, maybe need to regain themselves a little bit to try to go for that first place. But I am sure that they've had a little bit less time to digest than Method NA, but overall Method NA with one of the best seats that we've seen so far in the tournament.
No, I mean, exceptional performance from them. But at this point, you got to think Team Omegasniped is just having a huge amount of just they're just tired. I mean, they're having some fatigue set in. They've played a lot of matches, so we're going to have to see, they do have the counter pick map right now, but it's going to be important to see if they can just really rally, try to reverse sweep this. if they maybe even care about it, it's really hard to say. I'm sure they care deep down, but it's been a very long day for them.
Yeah, it's exhausting, having to go from that lower bracket point, being able to beat so many other teams that are really trying to claw their way into that position there. Even with Dark Slashers there, with the quick 2-0 there, actually many of the teams really were 2-0s after the limit game. Everything else was 2-0s. But even then, some of the games actually ended up being a little bit closer than they really wanted to have for comfort there, even if, Omegasniped was that second seed.
Okay, I'm going to do math really quick.
Take cover.
They did 10 dungeons, I believe, already today is what we are going to see out of Omegasniped. But Method NA is primed. They got here nice and early. They were the first team to qualify for the LAN, and now they are going to try to push it to the limit. They are going to try to see if they are going to be able to take first place for the NA region when we return. We already have whittled down all the teams from NA, found our top two, but it's time to figure out who the top dog really is going to be. It's Method NA versus Team Omegasniped. My name is Rich. I'm going to be your host. I'm joined on the desk by Sloot and Jack to figure out who our champion really is going to be from the NA. Sloot, you handsome devil. Who do you think is going to be able to close this out? We know that the next map is going to be Cathedral.
It's tough to say. I mean, we've seen Team Omegasniped perform twice on this map today. Really well both times. times. This is going to be the ultimate test of just how tired they are, just how fatigued they are, and just maybe how much they really kind of care at this point. They have that relief that they're in the top 2 now, but this is a map that they've performed phenomenal on, so we'll have to see if they can do it a 3rd time today.
Do you know why Agronox is green?
Oh, no.
No, why?
Because he's filled with chlorophyll.
Woof. How about that one, Jack?
Do you ever think about it like that? Did you, Jack?
Sap rich.
He's the guy in chat. I'm hearing that the dungeon's ready. Let's jump straight into the action. It is going to be Method NA versus Team Omegasniped. If Method NA can win here, they are going to win the entire region. Let's see if they can do it or if it will be extended to a 3rd dungeon.
Well, Jack.
Well, Sloot.
You look particularly disappointed right now with what just happened on the desk.
I'd say distraught over the tree fascination. It's really something here.
Now let's focus on the dungeon instead. We do know that Team Omegasniped, as we've seen twice today already, will get that first big pull at the start, after which they're all kind of, lemming right off of the side of that balcony, and then get rezzed by Luffy, who is already running upstairs and getting ready to res everyone up on Agronox's floor. Method NA seeming to do a similar pull with that mini boss and a lot of those packs at the beginning of the dungeon, needing to make sure you get a lot of interrupts on this trash. There's heals that go out. There's an AoE shield from the Fel Guard, so lots to look out for, not to mention, of course, Jack, that huge frontal from the boss that puts down a lot of pools on the ground.
Yeah, you've seen just the larger void zones they need to making sure they're avoiding here, as well as Method NA just kind of getting themselves off towards this cliff side. That way they'll be able to quickly jump off here. But they first have to actually make sure that they're not going to be in range, of course, of the blast when they're standing very far away. So good on them to be able to actually get to that platform, die in any of the sanguine that's going to be out there. And both teams having that exact same positioning there to be able to start getting the mass res cast off. You're seeing Luffy on the side of Omegasniped ready and waiting in position there. He's not able to actually cast his mass res until combat does finish up here for both teams. For their team. At this point, you're just waiting on that res, waiting on everybody kind of get into position here for Duelzac to be able to kill him. Because a lot of times, while you will want to actually kill him, a lot of times when you're doing, live servers, when you're this practiced and this well practiced to be able to get all those imps down right after Thrash Fight, it's so much easier just to be able to have everybody die and get that quick mass res off.
So, a bit of mistiming here from Team Omegasniped. And the last time we saw them play this, Luffy actually got there a bit too late. The DPS were too fast. They had to wait a few seconds. This time, Luffy is caught up waiting quite a while they finish off the rest of that trash. Finally, they do manage to res up, do their typical big pull, minus the kind of flowers in the far right-hand corner that we see, similar to what Method NA just did, but they're just that one step ahead. Once again, being careful to kite out of that Sanguini Panini. I was going to say Panini first that time, and they will be pulling Agronox here in just a moment. A lot of damage coming out of this boss in the form of just a dot that ramps up over the course of the fight, but we do have 2 waves of flower that spawn during the boss as well, making sure that none of them reach the players, otherwise they'll explode for quite a bit of damage.
Yeah, it's always very important to be able to kind of keep an eye on the tank as these fights kind of go on. The ramping damage, of course, when you're having to deal with the Succulent Lasher, which has just so much tank damage that will be going out there. So important to make sure you're having the tank being able to quickly establish threat on it and rotate through any kind of stuns, pushbacks to be able to get the cast off, to interrupt the cast and prevent it from going off. You are seeing Luffy here on the side of Omegasniped going down. They are just kind of clearing up the rest of the trash here, getting the quick res off onto him before they can actually pull the boss in Lust.
Yeah, so, a bit of damage. They want to make sure they save that battle res over on Method NA. I mean, Rich does make a good point. There is kind of a radiant green coming out of this tree, a lot of chlorophyll, as he said on the tree. We're really going to have to examine it under a Petri dish when we get a chance to. But back to the fight. Method NA now dealing with the first wave. Now, the thing we kind of haven't mentioned too much here is that Succulent Lasher. We talked about it a bit, but it's just so dangerous for the tank. The raw melees from that mob, as we see one spawn right now, is more than Agronox actually does on the tank. So you want to make sure you're locking that down right away, not only to save a lot of that real estate on the ground, but also just to get as much damage saved for the tank.
Yeah, at this point, it will require just a little bit of kiting here and there in case any of the casts do get off, spawning those extra green void zones that you have to be dealing with here. And at this point, you are looking for just a lot of the tank smashes, cycling through, of course, the CDs here. Everyone doing a great job standing close in the effervescence, not only to be able to filter all those flowers in, which they did an excellent job of, but also to make sure they're able to get as much healing off as possible just onto the entire group. The less time that that JB actually has to spend healing everybody, so much easier for him to be dishing out additional damage here. While you're on that 24 setting, a lot of times you are kind of, being able to have that kind of counterbalance between being very aggressive with your damage and making sure everyone's staying topped off here. That's why you're seeing a lot of times people kind of dipping a little bit lower here, but when the damage is so predictable, it really makes sense to be able to do as little healing as possible, as necessary to make sure you're staying alive.
The smooth bark of Agronox has fallen, as he does use a lot of tea tree oil. They move upstairs over to the rest of the imps here. Now, we know we know the kind of pull that we see out of this kind of imp area before Thrashbite coming out of Team Omegasniped. We've seen it twice today. They pull basically the entire room, plus the room before this, except for Gazerax. AoE everything quite well down after they line of sighted in the entrance. We'll see just what kind of pull method NA is doing. It looks like they're rearing up for a similar pull as JB runs in there, gets a few Moonfires out, and then runs back immediately to make sure that he can help LOS and deal with some of these mobs, getting that Typhoon ready just in case some of those Sanguine drop just a bit too soon. Now, they didn't pull everything. I believe some of the mobs on the side are still there as well, as we do see them run into the room, and indeed they are patrolling.
Yeah, you have to actually deal with all these scavenger patrols, and it's kind of awkward when they're having to run over the Sanguine all over again. You do have to start dealing with a lot of the books that are going out right over there. So it's very important to make sure you're kind of watching out for those, because they will have that expanding circle of the silence going out. You're also seeing another death going out on the side of Team Omegasniped here, losing their Windwalker here. They're at 1% here. They're able to get that first checkpoint here, so they are able to kind of get that res. But as we've seen so many times in the past, when bosses are having such high amounts of HP, slowing you down just a little bit more and just allowing the method snowballs, it can really gain up speed.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you don't want to use the battle res there, as there's the checkpoint, like you said, but just a ton of seconds lost. And, this is, I mean, they're not performing horribly right now, Team Omegasniped, by any means. We do have, unfortunately, the tank go down on Method NA. As I say that, they will have the battle res available, as it was a late death after the trash had pretty much already been killed. Thrashbite will be spawning in a moment, but they have to deal with Gazerax first as they res up and get ready to pull that in just a moment. Team Omegasniped, as I was saying, certainly not a horrible run from them, but probably the weakest of the three we've seen from them so far, at least, in the third Cathedral that they're doing right now. Perhaps some of that fatigue setting in, or maybe it's just kind of a freak accident. We'll see how well they perform their mass room pull here in just a moment. Gazerax has been pulled over for Method NA. This is a fortified setting, Jack, so there's a lot of damage coming out of this focus of destruction.
Yeah, the focus destruction can be so dangerous, really, to watch out for here. And of course, like you've seen in the past, you have to get everybody tightly stacked up and in together here, and as many defenses that you're able to really cycle through, they all have to be taken care of and focused on it at this point here. 24 can just be so lethal here. You're probably seeing like the Flourish Ganir kind of going out for JB at that first one, and probably you start seeing Trank if we do end up getting one more here. Probably only lasting not too long here, so you probably won't even really need to use it if you don't want to, but you're really not going to need it that much for Thrashbite, so as you're seeing JB taking advantage of it, you might as well be able to get it out, because Thrashbite, as we've seen in the past, hasn't been too difficult to deal with for many teams.
Not very difficult at all, and it's just he has a lower health pool than a lot of the other bosses, so it should be a fairly quick fight. The main mechanic really here being, outside of course avoiding the circle and the whirlwind weapon, as we'll see on the outside of the area, is how you deal with the kind of book and stack mechanics here. He will target a player that he will charge. You cannot intercept this charge, unlike his brother Smash Spite in BRH. The person needs to run behind or within one of those hit boxes of the bookcase, as we're seeing the scored full gaze go out. They do decide to hide behind. He will hit the bookcase first, spawning two of these tomes, which players will have to deal with and interrupt. And then here comes the AoE from the boss again.
Yeah, and really important to actually make sure you're getting the interrupts, the stuns out onto those books very quickly here, because they can put out an entire party-wide slow going out, and that can be extremely dangerous when you have to have the smash coming from Thrashbite here onto the ground. So thankfully, I mean, when you're having double Windwalker, they're very mobile and they'll be able to get out of it very quickly. But it does go to show, they add control on this fight, definitely cannot be ignored.
There's a lot of smashing and thrashing between these two bosses. It almost makes up their name every single time. Pulverizing Cudgel coming out again. Players do well to avoid it. He will now refixate one of the players soon, dealing with it, but likely he will die before that is even the case. Team Omegasniped does perform that big pull for the third time in a row very well, and they've actually made up a bit of that ground and are catching slowly up to Method. So we'll see if they can kind of stellar perform the rest of the dungeon. They did have a bit of a hiccup last time, skipping the spider pack, the enforcers at the start, and then somebody accidentally did pull them, having to deal with that. Method and A now pulling all these imps together. We see the AoE grip come out of them right away. Leg sweeps go down, and a ton of damage coming in from them as they want to kill all of these scavengers and imps before they get away through the portal halfway up the stairs.
Yeah, you're seeing a really good job there to have the Ursul's Vortex following, of course, that leg sweep, then followed up by the Typhoon once the Vortex actually drags them back here. So we've seen some teams taking advantage of course, the Ring of Peace to be able to just continuously knock those ads back, but the execution has been so strong by the entire team for Method NA that they didn't even need it. They just were able to wrap up everything in Vortex and stun and be able to deal with it so quickly and not even have to really worry about any of the damage coming out or any of the extra healing coming out from the Sanguine Puddles.
So really big pull coming in here from Method right now. They pull both of the small spiders on the side, everything into Nalasha's room, the Spider Queen with the webbed feet, making sure that, now they were caught caught a bit outside here. I was just about to say she does blink to one of the far players and then will target the group and do a huge frontal cone. So I think it was JB was just caught just a bit outside there. She blinked a bit far. Luckily, no one died, but also you waste a bit of DPS uptime as she blinks away and needs to run back to the group. Nonetheless, not too much harm done, and they do really well to kind of just melt this pack. It's a really dangerous pull here, but they seem to kind of have it under control, kiting away slowly, making sure none of the Sanguine heals Nalasha especially, but a lot of damage coming in the form of that poison dot on the tank from these spiderlings.
Yeah, and you're seeing as Nalasha rather is actually continuously spawning a lot of those spiderlings. You are seeing, of course, the Windwalkers actually helping out, adding those extra poison dispels whenever JB needs a little bit of help here, because you have to wait, of course, that 8 seconds. So at the 5, it does cap out, like you mentioned, at 5 stacks. So very important to be able to get those constant dispels out. But as soon as JB actually got the dispel out on the 5 stack, he's, E-Man is going right back up to 3. So that constant mitigation is so important, and also being able to rotate through those poison dispels to just make it as easy as possible on the tank here.
A little bit of great support from those 2 Windwalkers as the presumably last set of 3 spiderlings spawn. Nalasha will be falling here. Method now at 94%. Should be just perfectly enough percent for the remaining bats upstairs that we will see between Domitrax and Mephistroth, the 3rd and 4th boss of the dungeon. That should easily be able to complete the remainder of the trash that they need, putting them to 100%. Team Omegasniped has moved up here, doing their usual skip that they do, past the 2 Enforcers and the Orb Caster, and will themselves be ready to pull Nalasha in just a moment. But, I mean, this gap between the 2 teams is just not closing, Jack.
Yeah, it really has just been continuously going more and more in favor of Method NA here. Very curious to see if they're going to be able to have enough percent. I think it might be just a little bit over 5% from those bats, if not exactly so here. So they might just be in a little bit of a rough spot right as they take down Mephistroth.
I think we'll have to find out soon.
Yes.
We really don't have a choice, but I believe it's 1.5% per bat. I'm not really sure. I mean, if not, it would be an absolute catastrophe for the rest of the group. So hopefully not, because they would have to U-turn right after the kill Mephistroth and go down to the dungeon, which might be just enough time for Team Omegasniped to kind of catch up. But they seem really refined in this dungeon, so I doubt they kind of make a silly mistake like that on the trash. Nonetheless, Domitrax has been pulled, reaches that 90% threshold for the first 2 set of portals spawning those imps, which do a fair bit of damage with their cast and melee. Want to make sure you're interrupting or CCing them. Tank is picking them up, and soon enough we're going to hide here in the Aegis for that huge AoE hit.
And as Omegasniped is, of course, clearing out the rest of the trash leading up to Domitrax's room, you are having Luffy going down once again here, so very important to make sure you're getting him up as quickly as possible, expending that battle res, making sure you're having those constant dispels onto the tank there. So important, so vital here. As they're going into the Domitrax, like I said, they just got into that first Aegis, which will, of course, reduce the damage you take, reduce the damage you deal, and the healing that you deal to the rest of your party members. So very important, especially as a healer, whenever you're dealing with the Aegis, you're jumping in very quickly, you're taking that larger hit, and then you're stepping out, of course, right afterwards to be able to get your Wild Growth cast off, maybe even you're applying Beacon of Virtue when you're in the field if you're playing Paladin, and then stepping out for your Holy Shock or Light of Dawn cast, whichever it may be, to be able to get the rest of the party topped off.
Now, we're, of course, hitting now that the 50% phase on Domitrax, where you'll summon the remaining 2 portals with the Shivara that pour out the Mistresses, and, of course, the 2 Fell Portal Guardians. Those need to be killed in time before they finish their channeled cast, otherwise they will summon a huge kind of Fell Demon that does a ton of damage to the group. These Mistresses are particularly dangerous as they will do an AoE Shadow Whirl, punting players away from them. So you don't want them kind of getting into that shield area as chaotic energy is being cast from Domitrax, which is right now. You see the stun going up on the Mistress as everybody runs in, typhoons them out, making sure they're as safe as possible. Everyone hides in the shield, goes back out. Textbook example, textbook performance. They grab the 2 Mistresses again. One of them is banished, likely for Cephas proc from the Warlock, and also just kind of help with some support. Domitrax now dipping into a soft enrage phase, and that's all she wrote soon for Domitrax. Team Omegasniped not too far behind. Domitrax already at 61% for them.
Yeah, and at this point, we've seen some teams opt to actually use Bloodlust, for example, on the 2nd Portal Guardians that do spawn. At this point, Method NA just kind of holding on to it here, and I was kind of surprised because we did see, by not lusting on the last boss of Lura until the 2 ads came out, until the 2 Rift Wardens came out, it did put a lot more pressure onto the healer to be able to keep everybody topped off through that phase. If you were going to end up lusting onto Domitrax, that would again have that similar scenario where you are, of course, putting more pressure onto the healer by prolonging the Mephistroth boss fight here. Something that I probably would think JB would be more interested in doing, just to make sure they're having that safety. When you're running with a double Windwalker, they're just so easily able to just neutralize these Fell Portal Guardians. I guess it definitely makes sense to make sure you're holding on to Lust as you're going into Mephistroth here, as you're seeing Omegasniped not holding on to it and just burning it right now to be able to deal with the Portal Guardians.
Yeah, they're just trying to catch up as much as they can. Method NA dealing with those those 4 Dreadwing, the 4 bats that we mentioned earlier falling down. We'll see here once and for all whether it is enough percent. It looks like it is 1.5 per, as Method reaches actually 99%. So this is going to be a bit of trouble for them. They're 1% or some like below 1%, maybe even 0.5% short for the remainder of trash that they need for the dungeon. There is no other trash that is going to spawn in this room. Mephistroth has spawned though. He will be in this first phase for 40 seconds. Perfect amount of time for Bloodlust as we see Method NA use that Bloodlust. Players will want to spread out here. Ranged player, actually all players will want to spread out here, making sure they don't splash any of this shadow damage. You see that the 2 ranged are on opposite sides of the platform, making sure that they spawn those fell fissures on the edge, those big green circles, and immediately get out of them towards the middle of the room as to mitigate the damage. Because if you're caught in that circle, it's pretty much a one-shot, Jack.
Really is, and again, by having double range here in Marvin and JB, the Spires are always going to go out onto those 2 players here. Makes it a lot easier when you're having those double Windwalkers that are able to constantly just be sitting on the boss, not ever having to actually worry about going out and standing out at range to be able to bait them out here. If you're running with a Paladin, for example, because they are counted as a melee, it then would make it so that if JB by some miracle was playing Paladin, then it could have been Dark, Mid, or JB in that situation to get the Spire. But at this point, as Resident Druid, it's only Marvin and JB at this point.
And as we've seen them do 3 times already, Team Omegasniped has finished those 4 bats, getting that perfect 100%. There's a 15-second difference in deaths for the 2 teams in favor, of course, of Method NA, who has also had the benefit of Bloodlust here in phase 1 of this Mephistroth encounter. Now, on this phase, the tank needs to make sure that they use the Aegis to protect Illidan. One of them actually did leak as he horribly cries out, and I'm just disgusted at the moment, but cries out in pain as one of those orbs does contact with his chin, making sure that the phase is now extended for an extra 4 to 5 seconds. This is ramping up the damage on the group. JB does go down there. They manage to get him up with that battle res. Another orb hits them in the face. This is looking pretty dire for the team. Fortunately, they finally get out of the phase. Purgatory has procced on E-Man, manages to get back up to health, and they re-enter phase 1. So a bit of sloppiness there in that phase, but they do manage to restabilize and get back to the first phase. Mephistroth soon about to enter his transition phase for Team Omegasniped on the right side.
Yeah, it was kind of awkward position there, as you're seeing E-Man was actually having his shield up, but with the way that the shields actually end up impacting into Illidan there, you have to make sure you're standing a little further out from his position to be able to soak it up, and JB doing whatever he can to try to soak one of those orbs that was actually heading for Illidan to be able to kind of body block that while they do deal insane amounts of damage. You try to body block it, make things a little bit easier for E-Man to make sure they're getting out of that phase there, but it can be so painful to deal with, of course, as you were seeing JB going down. But like I said, they have plenty of battle reses at 15% left and quickly dropping here.
Yeah, but not too far behind, really. Team Omegasniped, they perfectly got out of that phase. 62% left on Mephistroth. Mephistroth about to go down now for Method NA, but they really got to hightail it right back to the trash. Remember, they pulled all of those spiders in that room, which some teams usually leave up, so they have to go all the way past Thrashbite's room and right down into Agronox's area and just pull the first trash they see. So they really have their work cut out for them. It is certainly looking in favor of Method NA right now, but they have to get pretty far to, just get the trash that they need. Team Omegasniped still at 41% on Mephistroth, not to mention, unfortunately, the 10-second deficit that they need to overcome because of the deaths.
Yeah, at this point, they're just really trying to be able to run, find anything that they can here. It's always very helpful if you're able to have, certain add-ons that can help you map out the trash percentage here, especially if they might be under your namesake for the team. But they are able to run down the stairs and, of course, be able to engage with the first thing that they can find here. Very close here, as it's only 25% left on Mephistroth for Omegasniped, so they should be able to get that extra trash percentage. They needed maybe 0.5% as they took down just one of those quick flowers.
It looks to me like they have indeed completed the percent they needed, and Method NA should, will be taking this series 2-0. But, man, I really don't understand what it is. This is a forced dungeon in some parts of the brackets that we see here at the regionals. There's just been so many teams